Hello and welcome to the new series of Drishti IAS. I am Pooja Dwivedi, and in this segment today, we are going to discuss about China's Patriots Only Electoral Reform. This is the controversial Hong Kong Patriots Only Electoral Reform, and what is this entire scenario? We are going to discuss it in detail. Now, first of all, we will talk about the news. The news suggests that Hong Kong's controversial Patriots Only election swept by Beijing loyalists means pro-establishment, has swept the electoral polls. The lowest turnout of 30.2% was recorded in Hong Kong's election, and after a landscape change was made in the electoral process of Hong Kong, this has happened. Now, before we begin, we are going to discuss about Hong Kong's history so that everything can be connected. In 1842, following the First Opium War between the Qing dynasty and the British colonial masters, Hong Kong was handed over to Britain, and after almost more than 1 century of rule, in 1997, Hong Kong was handed over back to China. Under certain circumstances, the political, executive and judicial landscape of Hong Kong was supposed to be free of any rule that was already there in China. And that rule was promised for 50 years. That means till the year 2047. This basic law, the basic law in which new democracy could exist in Hong Kong, was promised upon. And because of that, it was handed off back to China. So, if we talk about Hong Kong, basically, the history is not a lot important, but important from the perspective of the current scenario. We have to discuss that the declaration of Hong Kong's basic law is going to be there till 2047. There are certain ambiguities with respect to the basic law, and that is why tensions are occurring between China and Hong Kong. So, this basic law wanted Hong Kong's capitalist lifestyle to continue and a high degree of autonomy when it comes to executive, legislative and also judicial perspective should exist in Hong Kong. This is the mini constitution. The basic law is the mini constitution of Hong Kong. So, according to that, it should occur. And because of that, Hong Kong enjoys a special administrative region status. If we talk about Tibet, Xinjiang, Inner Mongolia, these are all autonomous regions of China, but Hong Kong is a special administrative region. Moving on, if we talk about more, that one country's two system is the current balancing or ruling scenario that is there in China. Ruling is not the correct word that I'm using here. It's basically a political structure in which the sovereignty when it comes to defense and diplomacy is with China, and other relations such as cultural relation, tourism and trade, everything is in the hands of Hong Kong. And it is basically a nation unification policy which was proposed by then leaders Deng Xiaoping in the 1980s, and under it, Taiwan, Hong Kong and Macau were to be administered. Also, if we talk about how the administration occurs right now in Hong Kong, it's basically Chinese Communist Party officials. They do not preside over the Hong Kong's legislative policies, such as that they are maintaining in the mainland provinces and municipalities. This is supposed to be there, but we will discuss how it has changed over time. Okay, and it maintains the authority to interpret Hong Kong's basic law. It hasn't used this authority a lot, but in the recent times, as we saw it, this has been used much more if we talk about from 2019 till today. And because of the interpretation, because of the ambiguity and vulnerabilities of the basic law, it has been seldom used to oppress pro-democrats. Okay, and all changes to political processes have to be approved by the Hong Kong government and Chinese top legislative body, that is the National People's Congress or its standing committee, which is heavily pro-Beijing. Okay, and the question that we have to ask over here is Hong Kong a real democracy? Hong Kong is actually not a real democracy if we talk from the perspective of international standards. Because first of all, Hong Kong is although allowed to forge external relations independently, but defense and diplomacy comes into the hands of China. and it has certain freedoms of the press, expression, assembly, and religion, and other protections under the international law. It also has independent judiciary, but ambiguity exists in the basic law, which heightens the fundamental tensions. These are with respect to voting policies, and there have been no free votes by universal suffrage for the chief executive, which is elected by the Hong Kong's, of course, the pro-Chinese national level committee. And Carrie Lam has won because of that itself. She is pro-Beijing. Although she is the first women chief executive of Hong Kong, she is pro-Beijing. Okay, let's move forward and talk about what is the actual Patriots Only plan for electoral reforms. This has started in the month of March 2021, sorry, not 2020 itself. The Patriots Governing Hong Kong resolution was passed, and that is because of National People's Congress. These are pro-establishment, pro-Beijing. And the candidates for Hong Kong's parliament, which is known as the Legislative Council or LegCo, these are nominated by the election committee. And because of the expansion of the election committee from 1200 to 1500, the power has risen significantly. Earlier, if we talk about the directly elected candidates, they were supposed to be 35, but now the directly elected candidates have come down to 20. Although the seats have been increased from 70 to 90, but the proportion of directly elected candidates have come down because of this Patriots plan. Also, any prospective MP, which is a member of the election committee or candidate of chief executive, they will be vetted by separate screening committee. When a separate screening committee comes into the picture, it is much more easier for the pro-Beijing or pro-establishment to screen those who are critical of the government's policies, who are critical of the Chinese government's policies. And 40 seats will go to the MPs which are chosen by the election committee. As you can see, the policy here wants to have a propaganda of China in Hong Kong, and 30 will be given to MPs elected by special interests such as business, banking and trade. So, as you can see, 40 plus 30, it becomes 70, okay? And just 20 directly elected. The propaganda of China weighs heavy over here. Moving on. Now, if we talk about Hong Kong right now, what are the aspirations for democracy? It basically has two factions, okay? Which is pan-democrats and pro-establishment. Pan-democrats want democracy to be introduced into Hong Kong slowly, slightly, and also not altogether. This is the traditional approach. Pro-establishment are very loyal to the Chinese, and traditionally only a small minority, very minor population wanted Hong Kongers to have democracy. But now the landscape is changing with respect to students who call themselves Youngspiration to make Hong Kong democratic. Okay, so of course nobody would want to be suppressed. Nobody would want democracy at this point of time to be ignored. And in the 15 years after the handover, I'm quoting from a book. In the 15 years after the handover, there was a series of official initiatives aimed at enhancing Beijing's control in ways that would undermine both the autonomy and the rule of law. This is by Michael C. Davis, who has written this in his book. So, as you can see, step by step, autonomy and democracy is being chipped away, although it has been promised by the basic law. And in 2003, a national security legislation occurred, which was a huge impact on the democracy of the Hong Kongers. Not only that, if we talk about recent times, 10 years back in 2012, Hong Kong school curricula was changed, was amended to make it more inclusive of Chinese propaganda. More and more pro-Chinese syllabus amendments were done so that the children could inculcate them from the beginning. And in 2014, Beijing proposed a framework for universal suffrage. Protesters organized massive rallies, which is very famously known as the Umbrella Movement, to have true democracy in their status. In the summer of 2019, they saw the largest protest ever. And a new national security law was introduced in June 2020. Now, what is this? This is actually to make the definition more inclusive, more wide, which takes into account sedition, any sort of protest, any sort of freedom of expression. It was curtailed because of the national security law. And because of them, many people were arrested, many pro-democrats were arrested. And of course, because of nothing in hand, apart from suppression and arrest, many pro-democrats, they flee the city. Moving on, if we talk about India-Hong Kong relations, it's thriving when it comes to trade. Although in certain years, because of China, it has come down. But as you can see, in the 1840s, when Hong Kong became a British colony, after the Treaty of Nanking, remember this, between the Qing dynasty and the British colonial masters, the result of the First Opium War. So investment in finance, services, maritime shipping, logistics, culture, education and trade. These are the areas of scope where India can have its future in. Not only that, but the Commission of India was set up in 1951, which was changed. In 1996, the name was changed to Consulate General of India because they of course knew that China was being handed over the Hong Kong region. And Hong Kong companies have been increasingly engaging in India's premises, which includes China Light and Power, Li and Fang, Shangri-La, Kerry Logistics and Picre. Okay, so Hong Kong is host to a large number of Indian professionals in banking, IT, shipping, and 11 public sector banks and 3 private sector banks are also a part of India right now. Numerous global financial major investment firms are also being inculcated. So you can see India has a lot of scope when it comes to trade. And Hong Kong is also a major sourcing center for Indian companies. It is emerging and it has emerged as a major re-exporter. That means whatever it has imported, it can re-export. It adds value and of items it imports from India to mainland China. Also, India was Hong Kong's 3rd largest export market destination. This is as of 2017. Okay, and Hong Kong was India's 3rd largest export market. The year is given. Moving on, if we talk about the important point over here, that is about 90% of our exports are gems and jewelry. Exports, gems and jewelry. Huge market. So, this is the graph which is going to show you that trend in India's trade deficit, how it has changed over the years from financial year 10 to financial year 20. The blue line is with China and the yellow is with Hong Kong. So as you can see, the landscape is changing, even the trade ones. But China is saying that it has introduced democracy in Hong Kong. It is not accepting the fact that although it has reduced the seats, democracy has not come as of yet. As it is saying, China's State Council has released a policy white paper on Monday hailing the democratic progress. And Carrie Lam has said that the low turnout is because the people are unable to accept the new change that has been done. They will eventually. This is what she said. And it said China had restored orders and brought democracy back on track in Hong Kong, criticizing the often violent 2019 protests. China doesn't want any other country to speak in their affairs when they are free to speak in the matters of Kashmir. So, this is something the international community does want China to abide by the basic law. But China cries foul when it says that they do not want foreign intervention. So let's move on to our mains-based question. With respect to the recent poll results in Hong Kong, discuss the controversial Patriot plan to reform the city's election by China into 50 words. Okay. So that's it for today. Tomorrow we shall meet again with another segment. Until then, stay updated and thank you so much for watching.